Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast for another interview. And today we are honoured to be joined by the member for Berwick, Brad Battin. A lot of B's there. Brad, thank you for joining us today.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me on.
Just for our audience out there who may not know a lot about yourself or your parliamentary career or your career before politics, could you give us a little brief description of yourself just before we get into the questions?
Yep. So Brad Battin, I'm the member for Parliament in Berwick. I was the member for Gembrook from 2010 to 2022, and my seat was abolished. But in my past, I've been a police officer. It's probably one of my main careers, working mostly with young people and offenders in crime. I've had a bakery, so I had a Baker's Delight for a 3-year period. I've worked in the prison system. I was quite well known amongst my friends group as someone who changed jobs a lot when I was younger. So from leaving school, I left school quite young. So I left school at 15, and then went out and started working from then in menswear, and I've done sales and land development, etc. And I went back to university. I did a diploma in public safety, and then I did a graduate diploma in adolescent health and welfare, which is my focus around young people. And then recently finished my master's in business. So continuous learning, but yeah, fair background.
Yeah. And that university life is something we're going to be talking about in our first question with you, Brad. So how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
High school was a little bit different for me because I obviously, as I said, I left school. So I left high school when I was only 15 years old. So I hadn't quite finished year 10. Fair to say I didn't really blend in at school that well. I have to say I didn't enjoy it. I'm a big believer in the fact that we've changed our education system so much that it's so academic, it doesn't have any other outputs. So kids who don't engage with it really have nowhere to go. So I think we need to address that going long term. But myself, so I suppose my university time after that was a little bit different because I didn't go to traditional. I did most of mine online. My first experience was a graduate diploma in adolescent health and welfare. Although it was Melbourne University, it was all based at the Royal Children's Hospital. So I never actually stood foot once onto Melbourne University land. I only ever did it at the hospital working with young people. But the program then gave us an opportunity for practical as well as the academic side of it, which was amazing.
Yeah, and do you think a lot of our students coming up now, finishing high school, do you think they should, go down that graduate diploma path and do that sort of thing? Because I know, there are a lot of students who, drop out before year 12, year 11, year 10, and they do that diploma path. And I think it is a good system, especially if, school is the typical school system is not for you, and, you're not really that sort of academic book-based learner, and you're more into, actually more practical-based learning and seeing the results of your own effort.
Yeah, I think that's actually true. We have to focus on the fact that some kids aren't academic. So we have to identify areas we go. And I think we're also falling into the trap now, and everybody hears the shortage in tradies and the shortage in other areas, service areas. If we keep talking those positions down, we're never going to get people to do those roles. Some of our probably biggest money earners at the moment are in the trades. So I'm actually saying what we need to do is encourage people to go down the path that suits you for long term. So if you want to be a trader, you want to go and work on the tools, go for your life. And there's opportunities there to develop into business. But also the services. We ignore the services, support services, disability sector. There's all these other services. We need to start saying you don't necessarily need to have a year 12 and a graduate diploma and a master's and all that sort of stuff. There's opportunities for you at a younger age to be guided into those directions, whether it's through TAFE. And I think if we come out more and say that's okay, rather than this thing, you have to finish your 12 and you've got to go to university, I think the outcomes long term will be much better for what we need for growth and a more balanced community rather than everyone trying to focus on being the boss. We need to get people who are the workers.
Yeah, and I think in one of our previous interviews, Joe McCracken did talk a little bit about this, and he specifically said that, why don't we have, diplomas and sort of internships, project-based, more, hands-on sort of learning within law and, accounting and that sort of thing. You don't have to always have it be book-based and that sort of thing. I think that's something that, we don't really have in our education system currently. And I think it would be really, really good if we had that sort of thing, especially for those sort of learners who aren't necessarily, into books and aren't academically book smart and are more, into that sort of doing things more practically and seeing the results of their work straight away.
Yeah, and that can also be industry led. We need to listen to the industries more. There's people out there that are better experts than me who understand and can predict a bit more of what's going to happen in our future employment. And how many times do you hear now that jobs that are available for the generation coming through now won't exist in 20 years' time because technology is changing and AI and automation, etc. So why aren't we getting the industry to start working with the schools and have a guidance on here's the new things you're going to need? And it might not be they're back to basics. It might actually be looking futuristic and saying we're going to need more coders, more developers in IT. And if we have a big IT system, we need more engineers, we need more people who can work with that IT to fix it, repair it, etc. So I think we should be changing our education system to suit what the industry needs in the future as well.
Yeah, and I know George here as well is doing a Bachelor of IT, and Tobias, who sadly couldn't join us today, is actually doing a diploma in cybersecurity. So I think in general, as you said, IT is a pretty big part of our future, and we have to have more pathways and more ways for people to enter that sort of fields, because as we currently see in our employment system in our in jobs, and especially, there are pretty big shortages within that IT industry, and we need more people coming through in the future. And I guess whatever pathways possible is better, because we need more IT workers.
100%. And cybersecurity is going to be a big thing. I've met with a couple of big cybersecurity companies who are Australian based, or shouldn't say, actually, they're based in Israel. They've got an Australian company of it. They are very high end cybersecurity. They don't deal with specific countries for reasons of security, but they say they are crying out for people who are qualified in their area, and they're actually get to the stage they were almost willing to say we'll train people to get them in there, and they do things like, I was in India fairly recently and they had the G20 summit there. So during the G20 summit, they didn't have enough IT people for cybersecurity at the level they needed when they got hit however many times, thousands upon thousands of times hourly whilst G20 was on. So they need to have people there to protect the cyber for that area. That was for India, but this will happen in Australia in the future as well. We need to make sure we've got people to protect. That's going to be our next big challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the government should be working towards in the future, hopefully. So yeah, we'll now move on to our second question, George.
Brad, before you owned your own Baker's Delight business in Wheelers Hill, how did being a small business owner prepare you for Parliament? And are we able to get some discounts for at your Baker's Delight store?
I haven't got the store anymore, so I can't help with the discounts. It's how does it prepare you? I would actually say a lot of the things I've done in my career have prepared me for where I am now. Baker's Delight prepared me from understanding the impact of government decisions on small business. So when government make a decision that doesn't sound big, that can be an extreme decision for a business that's on the borderline of being broke or not. So a new tax, which sounds like a great idea because we're going to put it towards a health program or an education program, the community will go, that sounds like a wonderful idea. We're going to tax the rich. But when you're doing it from the small businesses, the impact is they might no longer be able to offer jobs in your local community. So understanding that and how it impacts businesses was really big. But the other side of this is actually my policing background. Policing background was learning about communication with different people from different parts of life and different walks of life, good and bad. So that skill is something that I've brought with me to now. And the other part that I learned from one of my sergeants was really important. When someone comes into my office, or used to be an officer of the police force, if their house was broken into and everything was stolen, that's a pretty big thing. But if someone had walked past and stolen the front gnome from the front yard, we might look at that and go, really? Like, it's only the gnome. But to them, that's a big thing. So I still treat it the same. When someone comes into my office in anything in politics, when they bring it to my attention, they're bringing it to me for a reason. It's a big issue to them. So don't ever trivialize it, and try and see if you can work with them. And I think it's probably the greatest asset I've brought with me.
Yep, and as we've said previously in the podcast, I think George, I've said this a lot as well. A lot of politicians that we've interviewed have talked a lot about how it's not, you're not really there for yourself. You're there to represent the community, and being a police officer, as you said, Brad, and working at Vegas a lot, you're there to serve the community. You're providing a service, whether that be protecting people, whether that be giving them a loaf of bread. So it's really, really important that those sort of skills that you develop in those sort of industries can help you towards entering Parliament and becoming a good representative of your local area.
Yeah, it's all huge. It's all about I love giving back. So I've been involved in footy coaching, footy support, local community groups, Fred Hollows Foundation. They're just things I enjoy doing, things where I can see that I can make a difference. And I'm a firm believer too. Sometimes I've gone into something to trial and I go and do it and I want to make a difference, but then realize it doesn't suit me. If it doesn't suit me, I'm probably not going to put my best effort forward, and therefore the outcomes won't be as good. So I won't do it. I then go back and go, okay, how can I reassess and find other ways to help? Because we're all individual and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes if you fall into something that's one of your weaknesses, then you're better off, unless you can learn more skills for it, you're better off finding something you can do to help out that you can get some real benefit from for you and for the community.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there, Brad. So we'll now move on to our next question. So you were also a senior constable in the Victorian Police before entering Parliament. Could you talk to us about your role in the Victorian Police prior to becoming the member for Berwick?
Yep. So I joined the police in 2001. I actually originally applied. Here you go. There's no secret. I originally applied back in 1993 or 93, and I lost my license for driving, so I couldn't continue my application. That was a bit of a downer.
That's a bit controversial.
Yeah, it was at the time. Well, it still is a bit controversial now, but I prefer to be open on it. So I lost my license for 6 months, and then I couldn't get in at the time. So I went back and applied again when I was 25. Always wanted to be a police officer. My uncle, my auntie, we had a big policing family. So for me, it was pretty important. So I got in. I started off working in Dandenong, and I loved the general duties, going out in the van. You do all the wonderful things, but I identified one of the issues was high-risk kids. So kids at high risk of committing crime, and there was nothing there to prevent or work with them kids directly. So I started Operation New Start Southeast, which was based on Operation New Start. The original one was on the water. So it was a boat one. We did it to a land one. And we started working with these young people, 8 people at a time, giving them some tools about living in life and developing, getting better education or outcomes for work. So an amazing opportunity for me. So I did that, did my graduate diploma whilst I was doing that in adolescent health and welfare. And then I went on to work in Paran, and I worked in liquor licensing and I worked in pubs and clubs and what have you around Melbourne. So that was an interesting experience. Our role a lot of the time was inside the pub in plain clothes, and watching to see how operators operate, to make sure they operate within the laws, to offer a safe environment for their patrons, their staff, etc. So it was pretty interesting time.
So you're a little bit more like a spy in that sort of situation, just checking on and seeing whether these pubs and clubs were operating correctly for their patrons, just in plain clothes, not with the police vest on it, all of that, and with the gear.
Yeah, jeans and t-shirts.
Oh, a bit of a different sort of vibe there. Yeah,
it was good though. Well, very enjoyable.
Yeah. And I think, for all those out there who want to enter the police force, maybe that's something, you can look forward to later down the line, when you've got a bit more experience in policing, and that sort of work is very important, because a lot of people do. A lot of those pubs and clubs do, risk their patrons' lives in some certain scenarios. So I think it's important that, police are there, whether in plain clothes or whether in police vests, making sure that, these pubs and clubs are protecting their patrons.
Yeah, and I think the police too, the other thing is, for anyone who wants to look at joining, it's so varied. Like, you don't have to be just a police officer in a van driving up and down the street or liquor licensing. You can go in, there's a media team, there's detectives, there's the horse branch, dog branch, airwing. Like, anything you think you can do, you can go in and effectively go and become a lawyer and become prosecution. So there's so many different things you could do in the Victoria Police. I'd encourage people to go and have a look at it. I love the role. It's a bit of a challenge right at the moment, and there's a few shortage in numbers, but there's opportunities when you get in there that you can go into any field you want.
Up to our fourth question now. So, in addition to your work as a police officer and a business owner, you also have strong community connections in the Berwick region. Why is it so important for members of Parliament to build strong connections with their communities, e.g., especially within local football clubs or charities, like the Berwick Football Club or the Fred Hollows Foundation like you have?
Key point for me here is if you're not connected to your community in a personal level, you will never deliver for them in the right way. And I'm a big fan of living in your own electorate. So I'm lived, breathed, brought up my kids in Berwick. I went to school in Berwick. My kids went to school in Berwick and Pakenham. So I've stayed connected to the community the whole way through. They're the ones that ground you. They're the ones that have had the courage when you say something wrong, they'll tell you what you're doing right and wrong. They give you the feedback of what is important to them at the time, because what I think is important mightn't be what you think is important. My financial situation might be different to your financial situation. All these things I have to consider. So if you have that attachment to your local community, it is so important. And a prime example, right where I'm sitting in this part of the interview, I'm sitting in Mildura and Jade Brennan's up here. So Jade Benham, and we've just been out having a chat to people about victims of crime, etc. up this way. Jade's connection to her community is really important because her community have different issues to what my community has. And it's really important we bring all those into the one place in Parliament. And we can have the debates about what's important, what's the best outcome for across the state, but at the same time taking into consideration how is it going to impact my local community.
Yeah, and as we've said previously on this episode, it's all about community connections and understanding what needs and what your community want from you as your local representative. Because at the end of the day, you are just representing your community. You're not there for yourself. You're there to better off your community in general and make sure that they are represented equally and fairly in Parliament.
Yep, exactly right. And that's what my job is. My job is their voice, and I'm only there at their will. So and every seat's a marginal seat these days, but it makes it a bit more of a challenge. Very true. But I actually think that's a positive. That's a positive. My community make me work harder, or they don't keep me there. As I said, I took a seat from the Labor Party. I've still held on to it for 13 years, so I must be doing something right. And I think part of that is I go out, I engage, I listen, I try and fix things. But I think the most important thing is when I can't fix it, I just tell them. I don't try and lead along or make a big political issue of something I can't fix. I try to work with them to fix the issues we can.
And that's what a true great representative is. So thank you for that, Brad. And I do realize we have you probably have to be heading off now. So I do appreciate you coming on the podcast, and hopefully we can finish off the questions at a later date, maybe next week or in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it'll be very soon, I guarantee it.
Welcome back to the Brad Battin interview part 2. We actually pre-recorded some of the three to four other questions we did 2 weeks back, and here we are again now to finish off the interview. So welcome again, Brad. Thank you again for joining us. I'm sure most of the viewers by this point in the interview probably would know who you are, but yeah, we'll get probably straight stuck into the questions. So our next question to you is, who is actually your political role model / idol?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? So I, because I didn't really come from a political background, I actually didn't really have someone I suppose I looked up to. Of course, everybody loved Jeff Kennett, John Howard. I think they were amazing. We met John Howard was pretty early on. But if I said there was probably one person, it's one no one really knows, I'm going to be honest. It's Neil Lucas. He was a local MP out my area who I had a pretty good relationship with and helped me through a lot of stuff, learning about the political landscape. I worked closely out here with Gordon Rich Phillips, who was I think he went in 1999 and then left last term. So I had a bit to do with him. Dennis Napthine, always had a lot of respect for. But as far as an individual person, because I didn't really come through those ranks in the party, I didn't really have someone I idolised the whole way through. But there's a few that I look at and go, yeah, I'd like to emulate some of the things that you've done in the future. I think they're pretty important parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, you haven't really come from, that established political background, going through university politics and that sort of thing. So I think in a sense as well, it's good not to purposely just have one person to aspire to, because from what we've heard on the podcast so far, the interviews that we've conducted, a lot of the politicians specifically don't really like to pick one political idol or role model, because, if you try and emulate one person, in their era or time, they might have been a good politician, but their policies nowadays in modern contemporary Australian politics might not reflect what's needed in society. So it's important, I guess, to take multiple things from multiple politicians and, try and be the best politician that you can be. And, I guess be yourself and be your own politician. Don't try and, purposely copy someone else from 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and you got to take other people's points of view and what they've done and how they've done it, but put your own style to it. I'm not the same as most politicians. I refer to it as the bogan from Berwick, but I'm just a casual guy who enjoys life and family comes first. And I'm probably a representative as well as a representative of my community. I've worked in different organisations. I've worked for myself. I've worked in the police force, got a mortgage, got kids, got tats, got all the things that politicians don't usually have sometimes. But I think that's why I'm still here, because I'm just me. That's my most important asset.
Exactly, and what most people can't stand is a fake politician and someone who's not living up to their own personality traits and being themselves. If you're pretending to be someone else, no one's probably going to vote for you in that sort of sense.
Yeah, and if I'm just looking at myself there, if anyone wonders why I'm not looking at the camera, which is up there somewhere, I'm actually looking at you on a screen. So just in case it does look weird there for George recording it.
No, I think it's totally fine. At least because you've got a little setup in your car, don't you, Brad? Just with the camera on top there and that your phone, below, your phone, on the dashboard, I think.
Yeah, so the phone's actually sitting underneath my screen. So I've got a full screen sitting right in front of me. So it's effectively like a laptop in the car, and the camera you're using is the car's camera.
Okay. Pretty high tech.
Yeah, so I have to be honest. So it's a Tesla, so it's got all the mod cons for the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll now probably move on to our next question. So, George.
What made you run in the 2010 state election for the Liberal Party?
Yeah, George, it's an interesting one. I get that one a lot, and most of mine was, as you know, as a former police officer, and I dealt with young people a lot, and I didn't necessarily agree with the way the direction the government was going at the time and how they're dealing with young people. So I felt the best way to make change was to put my policies and my ideas forward. So I did that to the party. I always knew I was Liberal, so I gave that to the party. And when we started having discussions about some of the things that I thought was a good idea, and that's what got it originally involved. And then in about 2008, late 2008, someone said to me, "Well, I consider running." And at that stage, I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about it. I still turned up into branch meetings in shorts and t-shirts. So I decided to have a go. And then 2009 was lucky enough to be pre-selected. So it was mostly to do with, instead of being a person sitting at the side having a whinge about the way things were heading, I wanted to go and make some changes, particularly in youth justice.
Yep, and I think George has got a question as well relating to youth justice currently.
Yep.
Yep.
So, do you still think the government is going in the wrong direction in terms of dealing with young people in jail?
Well, I think the stats will tell us that, because they've got a 70% repeat offender rate. So that's the second highest in the country, and it's the highest it's been in Victoria for a long period of time. So it means kids that are going in are coming back out and going back in too quickly. I think we're going in the wrong direction when we continuously try and lock kids up. I don't think that's the answer to everything. But the biggest challenge we have with this government is they've taken money away from prevention programs. We need to stop kids going into the justice system, or engage with them at very early in the justice system, not just say there's no penalty, have a nice day, here's a $50 fine or whatever it's going to be from the courts. It needs to be, how do we engage with them, put them into programs, get them the support they need, and engage the top highest risk kids. And if we invest in them, we're actually investing in the community. So currently the government's cutting funds when it comes to youth justice prevention programs. We would be very focused on how do we keep the kids out of the jail by ensuring that they're engaged in the community and an asset to their local community.
Yeah, and I think in general as well, that's a really, really important issue. As you know, we've seen a lot of home burglaries on the rise and that sort of thing, especially after COVID. I think it's really important that, we really start to, educate these young kids, because a lot of the time, it's not their own fault. They're just following the crowd in the sort of sense, and they're, I guess, a bit oblivious to what their actions really do towards the community. So I think it is really important that we have that sort of investment in terms of education and that sort of thing. Because I think in a lot of circumstances, education is a really good way and a really good tool to help people in difficult circumstances.
100%. And I think education is the only way we can get out of this. And that's not just education outside the system. It's actually having education options inside the system, and not just teaching kids maths, but we've got kids in here who aren't going to come out and go to Harvard, but why don't we have programs around TAFE entry, around further education, re-engagement with education or the workplace, or putting them back into the services they need when they leave the justice system. And our justice system fails to do on all three.
Sadly, that is the case. And talking about education, we can now move on to our final question for you, Brad. So, finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university or high school?
Well, very lucky. My daughter's at her first day of university today. So
Oh, really?
I'd give them the same advice that I give her, and that is go out there, do your best and enjoy it. There's a lot to learn, but don't also think that you're going to be cemented to whatever you've done in university today as your job forever. Your generation more than mine, and mine more than the last, won't be one career people. You move through different careers through your life. So your education university challenges and experiences start now. But I didn't finish my master's till I was 46. So you should be forever learning, because the world will change and technology changes. Because if you had have called me 20 years ago, I can tell you I wasn't sitting in a car with a camera sitting at the top and a screen in front of me. So as the world changes, we need to make sure we've got a generation who are willing to change. And I think that's a fear we've had from a lot of people in the world. They fear change.
And as you said, we are lifetime learners, and and in any circumstance, it's really important to continue to keep learning and always have that growth sort of mindset. So, as Brad said, take any opportunity as it comes, and more likely than not, the career you're doing right now is probably not the same career that you're going to be doing in 20 years' time. So always, take it as it is and just let the flow of life take you wherever you need to go, I guess.
And in 20 years' time, I can tell you I won't be in this career. I'm hoping I'll be in a caravan and somewhere across the Nullarbor, cruising around with my wife and enjoying the final stages of life rather than the early stages.
We'll see what happens in between those 20 years then, Brad. We'll see where you end up.
No worries.
Yeah. All right. And those are all our questions for you, Brad. I do realize you are heading to pre-poll in Dunkley, so we do really appreciate you coming onto the Zoom and talking to us for about 10 to 15 minutes or so, and finishing off the interview. So yeah, thank you again, Brad. And we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
No worries at all. Thanks again, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, thank
See
you.
you later.